Today, we are diving headfirst into a really profound philosophical clash. And look, this isn't just some abstract debate. We're talking about two fundamental forces, chaos and will, colliding on the very edge of the abyss, only to realize they have this unbreakable bond. We're here to witness that dialogue and to really get why it's not just a bunch of words, but something more like a cosmic echo of creation itself.
And that line right there, it just sets an absolutely epic stage. What we're about to unpack is this universal tension that you can find pretty much everywhere. The constant, you could say necessary struggle between things falling apart and things holding together. It's the foundational conversation that's happening underneath every single act of making and unmaking.
So, to really understand this cosmic echo, we first have to meet the two voices who are locked in this ultimate conversation. One is this force of pure annihilating energy, a spirit that basically wants to unmake everything. The other? Well, he's a monument of unyielding will, driven to build order right out of the dust.
So on one side, you've got the Sapphire Jester. Think of him as the embodiment of chaos, the spirit of annihilation, the voice that questions and dismantles absolutely everything. And standing against him is Wotan the Overman, the personification of pure will, that raw drive to build, to create, to impose order. And right there, that's our central conflict.
Now, the dialogue really ignites with a sharp, cutting challenge straight from the Jester. And he doesn't just disagree with Wotan. No, he goes for the jugular. He attacks the very foundation of Wotan's being, this whole idea of creating a sovereign self. Wow, what a line, right? The Jester is accusing Wotan of smashing all the old idols just so he could build a new, even more demanding one, himself. He's arguing that this sovereign self that Wotan values so much, it's not freedom, not at all. It's just a stronger, more elaborate cage.
Okay, so what does he mean by this fetish of form? Well, essentially, the Jester is arguing that any structure, any value, any defined self you create eventually becomes an idol that you worship, and it ends up limiting you. For him, real freedom is about escaping form completely, It's about being in a state of constant dissolution.
But Wotan's response here is just fascinating. He doesn't get defensive. He doesn't recoil. He hears the Jester's laughter. He correctly identifies it as the sound of triumphant nihilism, the belief that all values are baseless, and he actually calls it magnificent. He sees the power in the Jester's view, but, oh man, he's about to reframe it completely.
And this is where the conversation takes its most interesting turn. Wotan argues that the Jester's nihilism, it's not the end of the story. In fact, he sees it as the necessary beginning, the very fuel for his own creative fire.
This is just a stunning admission. Wotan isn't just putting up with chaos, he's saying he requires it. He sees the Jester not as an enemy, but as the necessary fire, the essential force that has to burn away all the old, dead, and false structures to make any room for the new.
So for Wotan, nihilism isn't some dead end. It's a tool. It's the cleansing flame that creates what he calls a ground zero. And he argues that only from that absolute emptiness, that bare ground, can something truly new and authentic be built. Without the Jester's fire, creation would just be a tired repetition of everything that came before. And all this leads us to the climax of their exchange, where these two polar opposites find this shocking point where they actually come together. They realize they're not just opponents, they are uncanny, eerie reflections of one another.
The Jester really lands the final blow of realization here. He's not just some byproduct of Wotan's will, not a problem to be solved. He is the prerequisite. Chaos isn't an obstacle to creation. It's the cost of entry. You simply cannot have one without paying the price of the other.
And this just illustrates her relationship perfectly. The Jester's act of destroying all values is precisely what creates the empty space for Wotan to come in and forge new ones. One action directly mirrors and actually enables the other.
And we see it again in their most fundamental drives. The Jester represents that constant pull towards endings, towards things falling apart. Wotan, he embodies the exact opposite impulse, the will to persist, to build, to endure against that very same pull. They're literally defined by their opposition to each other. And this pairing right here is so key. The Jester champions a total freedom from responsibility, the nihilist's ultimate escape. But that freedom only has any meaning when you contrast it with Wotan, who willingly takes on the immense burden of consequence that comes with every single act of creation.
So the ultimate revelation is that these forces are totally inseparable. They are locked in this cosmic dance, two halves of a single, terrible, and kind of beautiful process. Chaos and order, destruction and creation, they're just two faces of the same coin, being flipped high above the rest of the world.
So what's the big takeaway here? What does this cosmic cycle actually look like in practice? Well, Wotan lays it out pretty clearly as a two-step process for achieving what he calls the sovereign deed.
It's a perpetual cycle, really. First, the jester has to do his work. He has to tear down the old altars, expose the comforting lies, and completely clear the stage. Then, and only then, on that raw, empty ground, can Wotan step in to perform the true, meaningful act of creation.
And that brings this entire philosophical clash right back to us, doesn't it? It forces us to ask a really fundamental question. In our own lives, in our societies, in our art, is a radical act of destruction, a total clearing of the stage, always necessary before something genuinely new can be born?
And we end on the jester's haunting final words. It's such a powerful and provocative thought that every structure, every value, every grand act of creation is, in the end, temporary. Just a brief, quiet breath held in the silence before the inevitable, cleansing laughter of chaos comes back once more.